It's been said that competition breeds innovation, but in our experience, it can just as often breed a lot of bad blood and petty name-calling. Rivalries in the video game industry can be bitter, and we don't just mean the rivalries that exist between protagonists and their palette-swapped doppelgangers. Games have to compete against others in the same genre and on the same console for attention and sales from buyers, which means it's up to each game to show those prospective players why they're the one that's worth their hard-earned money, or alternatively, to explain why their competitors are rubbish. Video games have a long history of mocking the competition both openly and in more subtle ways. Oftentimes, these jokes are little more than friendly jabs, a harmless bit of fun between colleagues. But at other times, they can feel decidedly less friendly, and sometimes they're downright below the belt. Fortunately, as nothing more than simple bystanders, we're free to sit around and watch the mudslinging play out for our amusement. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are 10 times video games made fun of their competitors. Number 10. Mortal Kombat 2. To say that Street Fighter revolutionized the fighting game genre would be a bit of an understatement, since it was basically a direct inspiration for every fighting game that followed. Mortal Kombat, however, was able to carve out its own niche and keep players flocking to the arcades with its trademark brand of ultra-violence and its secret characters that could only be found by meeting very specific requirements. In Mortal Kombat 2, the female ninja, Jade, can be found during a single-player game by winning a round using only low kicks in the match before the question mark stage. If that seems hard to figure out on your own, never fear, because Jade herself is thoughtful enough to occasionally pop up and give you hints, one of which is simply the phrase Chun-Hu. This of course is a reference to Street Fighter's own iconic female fighter, Chun-Li, famous for her lightning-fast kicks, and was probably meant to be a clue that the player needed to use kicks to find Jade. But still, how was anyone supposed to actually figure that out from a thinly veiled jab at Street Fighter? You could say it was a real kick in the teeth. Number 9. Duke Nukem 3D. You know what they say, always bet on Duke. Once upon a time, Duke Nukem was at the top of the heap as a pioneer of the first-person shooter genre, and he wasn't shy about rubbing it in a little bit. During his first 3D outing, Duke had more than a few quips to make at the expense of his competitors. For example, in the Death Row level, players can find the dead body of an armoured soldier identified as a doomed space marine. The marine in question is identical to the player character from Doom, though he's clearly had a bit of a bad day here. Later, after triggering an earthquake in the LA Rumble level, the ever-unflappable Duke remarks that he ain't afraid of no quake, referring to the then upcoming first entry in the Quake series that was poised to be a major contender in the FPS genre. In the 20th anniversary edition of Duke Nukem 3D, the newly added Mirage Barrage level contains a fresh secret in the form of another dead body, this time belonging to none other than Serious Sam, the equally snarky star of a shooter series that had grown in popularity since the original release of Duke Nukem 3D. Fortunately for Duke, his opponents couldn't exactly fire back in these exchanges. Oh, or could they? Number 8, Serious Sam 2. You know what they say, always bet on Sam? Yeah, whatever. Anyway, some of Duke's gun-toting competition gave as good as they got from Mr. Nukem. In the Forsaken Compound level of Serious Sam 2, veering slightly off the beaten path will lead the player to a secret Duke's hat, followed by a secret Duke's coat. And then things go pretty much exactly where you think they will. Eventually, the player will encounter a skeleton sporting the iconic blonde hairstyle and sunglasses of Duke Nukem hanging from a tree. Yeah, fair warning, there are going to be a lot of dead bodies on this list. Upon encountering the skeleton, Sam remarks that it appears to have been hanging there forever. For those who weren't on the internet much between the years of 1996 and 2011, Duke Nukem Forever, the planned sequel to Duke Nukem 3D, was perhaps the most infamous piece of vaporware in gaming history, languishing in development hell for 15 years before finally being released. released. Now the joke could have been on Sam here, given that, as I just said, Duke Nukem Forever eventually did come out, but the finished product was, well, let's just say that Sam may have had the last laugh in this exchange. Number 7. The Witcher 2: Assassins of Kings. Toss a coin to your Witcher, but maybe save a few for the Assassins. Based on what we see in The Witcher 2, they may need it. Assassin's Creed was a massive hit, full of characters and elements that instantly became iconic. One of said iconic elements is its famous Leap of Faith segments, where the player character dives from an incredible height only to land safe and sound in a pile of hay down below. Realistic? No, but incredibly dramatic? Oh yes. The Witcher 2 appears to take a somewhat dimmer view on the realism of such a stunt, however. In the game's tutorial area, players may stumble upon a dead body near the gates. The body is dressed in a white hooded robe and is lying on the ground next to a pile of hay, seemingly dead after taking a fatal plunge. The whole arrangement is deliberately evocative of Assassin's Creed and its leaps of faith, but takes a cheeky jab at what the actual consequences of such a leap would be, all while Geralt grumbles that they'll never learn. And then, just in case all that was too subtle, the player receives a bonus point to their assassination attribute as a nice little bow atop the whole thing. Number 6. Donkey Kong Country 2: Diddy's Kong Quest. Throughout the 90s, Nintendo and Sega had children at each other's throats on the schoolyard, debating which was the better console and who would win in a fight between Mario and Sonic. And maybe, just maybe, Earthworm Jim was there too. After completing the main quest of Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy Kong is invited to participate in Cranky's Video Game Heroes, a challenge that tasks the player with collecting the hidden DK coins in the game. As the name implies, you can also see how you stack up against heroes from other games on the rankings screen. Sitting pretty at number 1, of course, is Mario, followed closely by Yoshi and Link from the Zelda series. But if you cast your eye to the bottom right corner of the screen, you can also spot a very familiar looking pair of shoes and a laser gun next to the bin. Yes, the shoes belong to Sonic the Hedgehog and the gun to Earthworm Jim, two other prominent stars in the platform genre at the time. The bin is labelled No Hopers, letting you know exactly how Nintendo thought these mascots stacked up against their own heroes. Genesis might do what Nintendo don't, but Nintendo is what Genesis isn't, and also what Earthworm Jim can't. Yeah, got ya. Number 5. Grand Theft Auto 3. Cars and the criminals who steal them have long been a favourite topic for game designers, so it makes sense that there's more than a few franchises that revolve around that premise, and also why they would be so eager to knock each other out of the race. Driver was a game that was all about cars, specifically driving them, but its sequel, Driver 2, broadened the scope by giving players the ability to control Officer Tanner, the protagonist, outside of his vehicle for the first time. Despite its ambition, the game received a lukewarm reception and was criticised for the lack of meaningful on-foot gameplay and the dodgy animations of its character models. Not ones to ignore such an opening, a year later, Rockstar Games included an optional mission in Grand Theft Auto 3 that tasks the player with eliminating an undercover cop named Tanner. This version of Tanner is described in-game as being useless outside of his car, and was given the running animation used by female pedestrians combined with a male character model to make him appear strangely animated compared to the other characters of the game. Oh, savage. Number 4. Uncharted. Channeling the spirit of classic adventure movies like Indiana Jones, the Uncharted series wowed gamers with its picturesque locales and epic set pieces, and at a time when terms like gritty realism were being thrown around to describe other games of the era, it was a breath of fresh air for many players. Those players would also be delighted by the bevy of unlockable post-game bonuses that Uncharted offered, including everything from alternate costumes and gameplay tweaks to concept art and making of videos. One of these unlockables is the so-called next-gen filter option, which was interesting since the game was already in HD. When activated though, all the filter appears to do is crank up the bloom lighting effects and convert the game's normally bright colour palette into more muted greys and browns. This was the developers at Naughty Dog taking a dig at other AAA games at the time that were being criticised for what many perceived as a washed out and unpleasant visual style. A clever joke, but one that may have been a bit too subtle, judging by forum posts from players asking for an explanation on what exactly the filter does. It seems that this next-gen filter was, fittingly, ahead of its time. Number 3. Infamous 2. Remember what we said earlier about the raging console debate between Nintendo and Sega in the 90s? Well, fast forward a decade or so, and a new console war was just starting to heat up. PlayStation versus Xbox. Each console was scrambling to entice players away from their competitor, and things only got more intense as the consoles made the jump to HD. Right out of the gate, the Xbox 360 got off to a rocky start as players around the world found their brand new consoles rendered unusable by the so-called Red Ring of Death hardware failure. Microsoft did volunteer to foot the bill for repairs to any bricked systems, but the whole ordeal still left an opening for Sony to strike. While exploring the city of New Marais in Infamous 2, players might chance upon a shop called Red Ring Electronics. With a flickering red logo and a sign in the window that promises repairs to all systems without guaranteeing results, it's a clear attempt to skewer Microsoft for what may have been their biggest PR fiasco of the generation. The fact that the joke came 6 years after the incident just goes to show how infamous the Red Ring of Death truly was. Number 2. Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy is known as a prestigious series today, but in its first installment, it wasn't above a bit of good-natured mockery. When visiting the homeland of the elves, aptly named Elfheim, the party may go to pay their respects at the local cemetery. One of the headstones the player can read is engraved with the memorial, "Here lies Link." Now, this doesn't have to be a reference to the hero of Hyrule, but there are two pieces of evidence that suggest otherwise. Firstly, the namesake inhabitants of Elfheim all seem to sport golden hair, green tunics, floppy hats, and pointy ears, an ensemble that bears more than a passing resemblance to the hero of the Zelda series. And secondly, this tombstone engraving could only be found in the Japanese Famicom version of the original game. It was removed from the Western NES release, presumably because Nintendo of America didn't take too kindly to this jab at one of their main mascots. The reference was reinstated though for all future ports of the game, proving that pettiness always wins out in the end. Oh, and here's one last fun fact. In that NES version, the name on the grave was changed to Erdrick, a character from Dragon Quest, which was also a competitor to Final Fantasy at the time. Oh, incorrigible, those ones. And number 1, Asterix and Obelix XXL2 Mission Las Vegas. Can you name a more iconic duo in gaming than Asterix and Obelix? Well, yes, probably, but the two still have quite a legacy in the realm of video games, and no title embraced that legacy more than Asterix and Obelix XXL 2. Most enemies encountered in the game are Roman soldiers, all wielding the kind of swords and spears you'd expect any self-respecting ancient Roman to be carrying. But early on in the game, there's one enemy that seems to be wielding something a bit out of the ordinary. A water-squirting backpack. Pair that with the red and blue outfit and the moustache, and he's starting to look oddly familiar. This Roman soldier is of course an homage to the famous Italian himself, Mario, specifically as he appeared in Super Mario Sunshine. Being an early game foe, he's not too hard to take out. His main method of attack, squirting water, does no damage to the player beyond pushing them around, and making them damp, I suppose. Mario is only the first of several parody characters to be found in XXL2, in fact. There are other adversaries in the game with designs based on Sonic the Hedgehog and Pac-Man, a helpful spy named Sam Schiffer, and a large man cosplaying Lara Croft named Larry Kraft. It's all very tasteful.